saw a werewolf with a Chinese menu in his hand.
The views and opinions expressed in this podcast do not necessarily reflect the view of Wolfpack Research or any of its officers. The views and opinions expressed by guests are their own, and their appearance on this program does not imply an endorsement of them or any entity they represent. We are not investment advisors. We hold no registrations with the SEC, FINRA, or any other regulatory agency, and none of the opinions expressed on this podcast should be considered investment advice. The listener should assume that we have positions in and stand to benefit from any stock or other security mentioned on this podcast. Do your own research before making investment decisions.
Welcome to the Wolf Den, ladies and gentlemen. This is Dan David joining you. And joining me from the pack is Carl, our sound engineer. Ever present, ever here. God help us all. It never goes well, but we're going to give it a try again today, Carl, okay?
It is a hump day. Hump days are good.
You're pathetic. Today we have a guest that I have known for over a decade on different levels. 10, 12 years ago, Crocker Coulson was just some other IR guy that had some China clients, and I was not fond of any of those people. Over the years, I've gotten to know Crocker, and I find him to be a very decent guy. I call him a friend, and he reaches out to me once in a while. I reach out to him, and I'm happy to have him on my show. Thanks for joining us, Crocker.
And we should also mention I was not in a large way, but I was a supporter of your quixotic campaign to become a member of U.S. Congress, and you're one of only two. You're one of only two Republicans that I have supported in my lifetime, and the other was Schwarzenegger. So you can feel proud to be in that rare company.
The governor.
Yeah, well, yeah, I think I've got just as many scandals as he does, right? So it could be Crocker. Crocker could be the problem.
But he won. He kicked Gray Davis out. He booted him out, and I think he was like 2 terms. Maybe.
Well, I don't think he finished the second term, Crocker. I think that it all went badly.
Oh yeah, right. You're right. I forgot that part. But it's California. It's like Hollywood.
It happens.
Come on, give me a break. It happens.
He's redeemed himself.
He's more than redeemed himself.
Yeah, a pretty good-hearted guy, and I think you are too.
And you missed actually the beginning of our relationship, which was before you guys got interested in the dark side of China. You guys were calling me up, asking on these stupid little microcap stocks, are they going to be ahead by a penny, behind by a penny? It was mostly Maj, but completely
not mostly.
Obsessed.
Not mostly. It was exclusively Maj.
By infinitesimal changes in the distribution of earnings, which we now know were all completely fictional. So
he didn't believe that at that time, and nobody else did really. I mean, it's
very few people when you came to $40 or $60 million market cap companies were obsessing on whether they were going to beat by a penny. That was a very narrow club, people who are trying to figure that out.
Well, look, I will say this, about Maj, and I wasn't into the investing part of the business. I mean, you and I never spoke, until there was the short side. He is a very good micro cap investor, very value orientated. He really does try to get it right. And this took him by surprise as well. And you've got to really love that space to be in it. I hate microcaps. I hated them before I knew I hated them, and I still hate them. And
we can get into my whole history in IR, and I'll tell you about my experience with microcap.
Well, I mean, listen, let's back up into that first. Listen, tell me a bit about your history. Crocker Coulson, your history is pretty rich and interesting. I will tell you from what I've read, and you've got a website, crockercoulson.com. I relate to you and your upbringing and your history and your likes and dislikes, not at all. I wasn't an 11-year-old that was into avant-garde film.
What even is that?
Well, Crocker, tell us, Crocker.
Well, yeah, so I grew up originally as a city kid, and this was back in the 70s, right? Mm-hmm. So this was in the era of garbage strikes and dog shit everywhere and mugger money. So it was a different city, but culturally, that city was like crazy interesting. And I came from a high culture, traditional family, but I, from a very young age, was into the weirder stuff. So, I would be dragging my parents to go see like some 5-hour film. And so then when we got, and then my parents, they had 3 kids in private school, and my father was head of a nonprofit. So it was like a good job, but it wasn't paying what you get in the private sector. So he just couldn't handle them anymore. They were crushed under the weight of private school tuition. Mm-hmm. So then they moved us all out to suburban Connecticut. And, at that point, it's a very different environment. So it's very similar to, I heard Roddy Boyd's interview. Like, I'm sure my upbringing, once I was transported out to Connecticut, was not so different.
He doesn't carry the highbrow kind of vibe you do today, though. Roddy, I think, is a little more comfortable, in the rat-infested gutters of New York, taking dictation from, a source. I mean, he's gritty that way. But, where you were just like, I mean, it wasn't even the avant-garde film. It was like, hey, man, I just fell in love with writing as well. And that was a passion for me. And you ended up going to Yale. I believe you were first in your class at Yale?
No, I was not first in my class. I was summa cum laude, but that doesn't mean first in class. I was like top decile or something. I don't know exactly how they.
Yeah, so you're a dummy.
I'm an idiot.
Yeah.
I mean, I proved throughout my subsequent life that I am an idiot, but I was actually very good at schoolwork. So, so it's one of those guys like good at taking tests, stuff like that. Then you put him out in the real world, and he makes like one dumb life decision after another. So that's me.
Well, I think that's all of us in a lot of ways. Going to Yale, and then again, I don't relate to this so much, even though I grew up in Michigan and there are Great Lakes and another 10,000 lakes in between. You're like this sailing phenomenon, right? Like you're like number 4 in the nation or whatever.
I was number 4 in the country in high school.
Yeah.
And then one of the ways I got into Yale early was Yale sailing got 1 pick per year. And so they picked me because there's only so many sailors who also do well on, good grades and test scores. Right. Like most of them are guys who are doing bong hits in Florida and they can sail 12 months a year.
Yeah.
Those are the best sailors.
Yeah.
Okay. So anyway, so I was their pick, and I sailed hard for the first year and a half. And then I got into the Yale Daily News, and that was all consuming. So I totally bailed on the sailing program, and they got cheated out of their pick.
Did they? But
they did. And we for them, because boy, that was tough on them.
Oh, I bet they just, they couldn't get over it. But their loss was what, you were the editor of Yale's, whatever they call their stupid fucking paper.
I was the editor in chief, which was like Hunger Games who got to be editor in chief.
Really? That was a big deal?
You had to be there till 4 a.m. every night, getting the paper out. It was a daily newspaper. Keep that in mind, while you're also carrying a full load of classes.
Wow. So it was like Hunger Game for geeks, right?
Exactly. For writer geeks. Well, you crank out these long reports.
Yeah, one a day.
Yeah, exactly.
Crocker, I've been dying to ask because I've never gotten to it. We've had a ton of Ivy League guests on. Mm-hmm. Skull and Bones, real?
Oh, so I'm the guy who decided that the Yale Daily News should write an editorial denouncing all the senior societies. Uh-huh. And took a picture of this guy. I hope he never listened to this. Andy Bain, whose prank he had to do was felating a statue on Old Campus, and it turned out that his grandmother subscribed to the Yale Daily News. So he was on the front page giving a blowjob to the statue, and his grandmother happens to be a subscriber because he's like a 4th generation Yaley. And he literally had a hit out on me for the next 3 months. And so I was invited to join Skull and Bones, declined, and then trash them in the Yale Daily News. So
okay, let me back up for that for a second. First of all,
therefore I never got to work for the CIA, surprisingly. Unless all this IR stuff is just a cover for being in the CIA, which would be a good way to get over to China.
There's a lot to unpack there. Slow down. So so you had this guy. You said Andy Bain. Make sure you tag him on this show.
Andy Bain.
Who had to explain to Nana why he was blowing a statue because of you.
Exactly, and he loved me for it. And he was much big. He was like a real. He was like a Laxborough or whatever. So he's like a strong guy. Didn't want to mess with him.
Right. Well, in Flint, you would have gotten your ass kicked for that. But then again, so would the guy blowing the statue. So it would have been a whole thing. So then you. But
I don't think his Nana was into that stuff.
Oh, Nana was pissed. I guarantee it. But yeah, I think the LGBTQ community has, it's a growth industry now, and they've had their moment of togetherness, and I think it's great, and it's good for them, and a long time in coming, really. So you were actually approached to join Skull and Crossbones,
Skull and Bones, yeah.
Skull and Bones. I guess that shows you how much I care about that.
I know my secret
things.
societies.
It's ridiculous, but how does that happen? Does somebody come up to you with a paddle and a?
I had a good friend who was in, and I said, I just can't do it. I don't believe this is already Yale's already too elite. You don't need elite, and also it was all male, and it was involved a lot of weird things of being cooped up with other males doing stuff that just doesn't appeal to me.
Yeah. Why is that always so homoerotic to join one of these organizations?
That's a good question. That's a very good question. Maybe it's like a precursor to the culture of the CIA. I just don't know.
Yeah, they want something on you with pictures early on, right?
Exactly.
So when you're in the CIA, they can be like, "Hey, man."
They have the compromat from senior year.
Remember when I had you jerking off that goat?
Yeah.
Wow.
Remember when we all did that thing in the coffin that we have pictures of? Yeah.
Okay, so you passed on that, and it doesn't sound like you got too much blowback. Maybe some stink eye from a jock about it.
No.
But and you sail through Yale, so to speak, do very, very well. And you go on from there to do what?
First job out of college was a year-long, they call it writer internship at New Republic. Mm-hmm. Which used to be the most influential magazine in Washington, D.C. That was the era when Michael Kinsley was the editor-in-chief. And he's one of the smartest people I've ever, had. He's kind of Aspergy, but he's super, super smart. Then we had a guy running the back of the book who subsequently got into some trouble in the Me Too era named Leon Wieseltier. And it was just an amazing experience because at that point, if you write for the New Republic, you could call any congressman and their aide would pick up and you'd get through to the congressman. And then I was unique. I was the only one who was allowed to do what they called front of the book, which were these short little political pieces. But Leon liked me, so he let me do these super long back of the book pieces. So I did this thing on what is postmodernism, which was, I don't even know, I think it was 8,000 words on that. Jeez. I did a whole long piece on liberation theology, which he let me do. So he let me do crazy stuff that. And this is 1 year out of college. And then that led to getting invited by Art News and other people to be a contributor. So I was kind of on a tear as a journalist, but then, I just decided to take another U-turn.
So Leon had his Me Too moment.
Yeah.
By the way, what was his Me Too moment? Just so we can, context it.
Oh, he was always tied into every cultural person you could think of in Boston and the East Coast. And he had a beautiful, I think she was Pakistani wife, who, before I knew it was his wife, I made the mistake of hitting on her at a cocktail party. But Leon's problem was he just couldn't keep his hands off the female interns.
Yeah.
And the female interns, there were a couple of writers, but mostly they were in the business department. Yeah. And they were just these super attractive girls. And so he was always carrying on affairs with multiple people. And eventually, he was just ended up on one of those. You remember when they started posting those spreadsheets of bad guys in the media industry?
No.
Anyway, that happened. He got taken down. He was one of those guys.
Oh, well, sounds like it was well earned. He had a 40-year run, but
but he was a great guy, super smart guy, and I never knew of anyone that I would consider using undue influence. The ones I were aware of, the girls were into it, but that's only knew a few.
That's what all the men say. Carl comes in.
Well, I was friend with a girl, so
Carl comes in every Monday and says that. Oh, the girls are
okay.
Okay. Don't ever believe it. So, as a part of this, your journalism career, you kind of people come up in a comedy troupe with other famous people. You worked with Andrew Sullivan super blogger. I love Andrew Sullivan. He's
he ran New Republic later for a while, and then he's like one of the guys who's monetized Substack to the greatest effect. He and Tagby from Rolling Stone, I think, were some of the top 2 paid guys.
Yeah, there's nothing you can't love about Andrew Sullivan. He's a gay Catholic Republican centrist. So like you would just
he's actually a Tory. I think he would correct you. He's not really Republican. He's a Tory. So
yeah, well, you know what? We're in the United States, so I mean, like the Tories had to pick a side, they'd be Republicans. So although I think he probably has gone independent because he's been pretty disgusted, but he's a great read. And your roommate was Malcolm Gladwell.
Yeah, who at that time was writing for the Reverend Moon. So he like started
Malcolm
really
Gladwell
at the
was
bottom.
writing for the Reverend Moon? I don't think I knew that.
Well,
yeah, I can't remember what it was called. It was like the Washington something or other. It was the like kind of like sort of right-wing alternative to the Washington Post, but it was totally funded by the Reverend Moon. It was his attempt to buy influence in Washington.
Yeah.
And Malcolm, because he didn't go to Yale, he went to one of the top Canadian colleges. So he didn't kind of have the in. So he started there. And then I think he leveraged that into the Post and the Post into the New Yorker. And then he published
Tipping
that first
Point?
book, The Tipping Point, which was actually a big chapter of The Tipping Point was another guy who was with me right at the same time. It was about Jacob Weisberg's mother. And Jacob Weisberg went on to found Slate, not found it, but he became for a long time editor and CEO of it. So it was like it was a really interesting group of people that ended up, having big runs in the media.
Do you still have any contact with Andrew or Jacob or Malcolm? I mean, you were roommates with Malcolm.
Jacob is a close friend. Malcolm, I think, at a certain point got too famous to, I see him from time to time out and about with some 20-something at his arm. But
I got to tell you, I cannot wait to get so famous that I can get new friends. I can't stand the ones I have. I haven't been to Cape Cod for a long time, but I am actually planning on going there this summer for a few weeks. So maybe I'll see if I can look up Andrew. Oh, but I was working with him, but not a close. But like Jacob is a very close friend. Yeah, I in case you can't tell, I definitely find Andrew the most interesting out of all of them. But the Malcolm thing is kind of cool. I mean, you have in your bio that you spent weekends fruitlessly trying to outrun Malcolm Gladwell. I mean, what does that really mean that you were trying to outrun?
He was a serious runner in college.
Yeah.
But he'd because he was just focusing on cranking out articles, he hadn't been running at all. And I was one of those guys who would run 3 or 4 times a week. So I was like, oh, let's go out and run. And it was just you just learn that genetics is everything in sports because, we'd kind of be keeping pace. And then it'd be he'd turn on the 3rd or 4th gear and he'd finish in half the time, even though he hadn't been training for 3 years. Wow. So that was well, good so I totally lost there. But then I went up against Michael Kinsley in blow pong and I just trashed him. I mean, so, there I was in my element.
There you go. So you kind of matriculate from there into, which I find fascinating, to making films. Not only did you make films, but from what I can see here, you made 4 films that I know of no one who would want to watch. I mean, it's just I guess Trumpet 7, your first film, Trumpet number 7, was your most acclaimed and best rated, and it went to Cannes. And they're all kind of art house films, right?
Yeah, right. So maybe not your crowd.
Not my crowd. Well, it wasn't anybody's crowd. I mean, how did you do on those films?
Well, so Trumpet number 7, we spent so little that, to be honest, we lost money. But, we did get into Cannes with our very first effort. We got released in France. Whatever, that was okay. The ones for PBS, those were break even because they covered all costs up front. And then I think there was another producer involved. He probably made some money off of the ancillary rights. And then, then the other ones were like on Showtime, but like we didn't get much of advance. So I had 2 break even and 3 money losers, basically.
Okay. All right. Well, for art house films, that seems like, a win, kind of. I mean,
yeah. I never had the breakout. You're always like looking like the arty, but then like reach the edge of the mainstream. And I never was able to do that. And I spent like 3 years or 4 years on the project I was convinced was going to launch me. And then it all kind of fell apart.
Which project was that?
So it's an incredible novel by Paul Theroux called Picture Palace.
Uh-huh.
And I optioned the novel. I wrote the screenplay. At one point, I had Meryl Streep attached to play the older version of the character.
Oh.
And we had supposedly the international money locked up, but then I could never find the domestic. So we only had half the budget. And then everything started, like Meryl Streep got on other projects. So she's like, you can't use my name anymore. And then the option with Paul Theroux ran out. And I was just like, that kind of broke my heart. And I was like ready to move on.
Right. Wow. Well, you lose Meryl Streep. I mean, there's just like no. Yeah. Meryl's out, but replacing her is Demi Moore. What do you think?
In a very serious art house piece.
Yeah, it's going to be a very different movie now. So what? When you were in LA at this time, and
yeah, I was.
So you're out there trying to make it happen with art house films, and at one point or another, you're just like, nah, the hell with this.
Yeah, I was like, so, I reached the point where I decided I wanted to have children as a life goal.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, I can't be like this hand-to-mouth indie film guy with no sustainable income. So like, I had to find something else. And so I did SAT tutoring for 6 months. And then I actually worked in like a boiler room, trying to help small businesses that had problems with accumulated debt. And anyway, but then I saw this help wanted ad for a investor relations firm that was out in San Fernando Valley. So like, if you know LA, like being out in the Valley is not like a premier address or anything.
No.
So this was not like the top of the pack. So it was this guy who had a small, I think there were like, I don't know, maybe there were like 6 employees when I joined. But the advantage was this guy, Bill Coffin, he'd been doing it for like 30 years. And he had a lot of experience, and he was generous in sharing that experience. And then he also kind of wanted to like spend more time on the golf course. So as he saw that, I was willing to really put all my heart into it, he then let me advance. So I started as the administrative assistant.
What was the name of this company?
It was called Coffin Communications Group.
Oh,
which
so
then
it was
became
CCG.
Which then became CCG. Like when I became president, we negotiated to take because we always got, especially with healthcare companies, like, oh, I'm calling up with this great, pharmaceutical stock from Coffin Communications. They're like, oh, you're going to put me in the coffin? This sounds like a dead item. It's dead on arrival. You get every joke you can imagine from the coffin thing.
And it just so happens your name's Crocker Coulson. So
right. So from that point forward, as Bill kind of spent more and more time on the golf course, then everybody just assumed it was Crocker Coulson Group or whatever. It just became CCG. We never said what it stood for.
That's interesting, because that kind of brings me up to date of where we met, because it was CCG, and you alluded to the fact that you said you guys were always calling about, hey, is this, what do you think? Is this company going to beat or whatever? Obviously that was Maj, but he wasn't just calling you, as you know, right? He was calling Red Chip.
Of course.
He was calling Matt Hayden at Hayden IR, and
right. Yeah.
He really thought he had relationships. Like, I mean, I think he really thought he was close to Hayden. Like they were buddies, right. and they just were not, quite frankly.
Right.
You, since you're on the show, you were always just more serious. Like, time is money. I'm not going to sit here on the phone with him. And I think that kind of pissed Maj off a little bit. He wanted people to, notice how diligent he was in his work and compliment him. And so he was more.
Well, I also just found it like kind of the questions very like superficial. And I was also like
and you're really bad at hiding whether you think a question is superficial.
I know. So and then I was also like a big stickler on Reg FD. Like we were always doing that training for our clients, and of course I'm sure once we left the room, they totally ignored us. So like when people are like trying to figure out if it's a beat or a miss, it just like makes me uncomfortable.
Yeah, I don't.
And that was that transition period when Reg FD had just kind of come in, and people were on the street were trying to figure out how seriously it was going to be enforced, or was it just like, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I remember, like, I was running the venture capital arm, but like, his interview style, from what people would say, was really, really good, because like you can't get the Reg FD past that line. But you can ask all kinds of questions around it. And let's face it, everybody does. And you never really, really know, but you have, or he had a good sense for it and a good idea for it. But I could see where that would make somebody in IR uncomfortable, although I've never heard it make anybody else in IR uncomfortable.
Well, so the SEC had kind of a safe harbor for what you call the Mosaic Theory. So if you can piece together what's out there publicly with questions that are not in and of themselves material, and then that adds up to your value-added analysis, whether they're going to meet or when you go out and do some channel checks, that's how it's supposed to work. Mm-hmm. But as we all know, in the bad old days, it would just work like the CFO would call up the 3 top sell-side analysts and tell them the number. They put out their thing, predicting to beat. And, that never entirely went away. And I remember once we got into the China thing, there were certain hedge funds who would just like insist that me and any of my people who had also trained leave the room when they meet with management, because they knew we would be like the FD police and they wanted us the fuck out of the room.
Well, I think that worked for you too. Right.
It kept us from liability for stuff we didn't want to know. If
somebody's going to engage in criminal activity, you should probably just go ahead and not be there.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Fair enough. Well, look, I got more involved in the investing side after an event in September or October of 2008. I think you might remember. That was called the financial crisis, and more than half my money went away in 2 months. Right. And and Maj was suddenly living with me. My wife walks into a room and, but I'm just kind of holding Maj in my arms, telling him it's going to be okay. And literally she opens the door, doesn't say a word, and just, raises her eyes and shuts the door. Like, I don't want to know what's going on.
Yeah. So I do remember those days when basically guys on a trading desk would stop answering the phone and they're hiding under their desks and all that. What is interesting from our perspective is by the time you get to 2009, we are so overweight China. Oh, listen, China comes out of this thing like a rocket.
I'm going right there right now.
2000. Okay, all right.
I am going right there right now because, and I will say for Maj's part, the reason he was so upset wasn't the loss of his money or mine, unfortunately. Because he was still a millionaire and he was still going to be okay, but it was other people who had invested, he felt, in him. Right. And we kind of talked that through over a couple of weeks, that his style of value investing and really getting an edge by doing more fundamental due diligence was probably the right thing to do. And this was an anomaly. So when we start looking at, I don't know if you remember, he had like 20 things he would look at for a potential investment in a company.
Right.
And every one of those companies ended up being China-based in 2009.
Right.
So, you're down 80% in 2 months after being up 50% year over year the previous 2 years. Right. And in 2009, he picked up 229% investing long in China.
Right.
And that's where you guys kind of come in.
Except you guys are coming in like 5 years late.
Probably,
situation.
Yeah.
Because you weren't there in the early days when all these things were being put together.
Right. When Ben Way was putting them together.
Well, there was Ben Way, but there was also Andrew Warden. There was John Carnes. There was Barry. There was, there was like.
Is that Barry Kitt you're talking about? Dr. Barry Kitt?
Barry Kitt.
Yeah.
No, that's not Dr. No, Barry Kitt was a good guy. He is a good guy. And he never, he was a hard ass when it came to trading, and if he found something wrong, he would be ruthless in getting out of position. But no, his Dr. Kit was the guy in China who was one of the school of fraud ringleaders.
Yeah. And at West Park Capital, Rick Rappaport and those guys were.
Yeah, so West Park would kind of do like whatever they could get across the desk. But that was true of a lot of the investment banks in the space. They just didn't have any diligence capability, didn't care to invest in that.
Well, I don't know that any of the ones we just mentioned ever said they did, but I do know that Rodman and Renshaw said they did. I mean, they would.
I don't know.
No, I'm not asking you. I'm telling you. We were on the investor side, and they're like, "Hey, we might collect 10% transaction fees here, but we have people in China looking at these companies, and that made us feel better in 2009."
They did have a lot of people in China, but they were not. Rodman was never, even when things got bad, was never looking for problems.
Right. Well, that became their defense in the end.
Roth was looking for problems. They just couldn't find them.
Oh, bull fucking shit.
Oh, no, I know. I was traveling with those guys. I can tell you stories where asset, you can say, if you, Dan David, with your background, was able to like figure these things out.
Right.
But I can also tell you stories.
Which was no background at the time.
I can also tell you stories of deals that investment bankers walked away from that you never heard about because they found out. Like, I'll give you an example. There was a deal that Bree Murray was going to do, and it was essentially like the Foot Locker of China. Uh-huh. And they went, and this was after the first 2 or 3 frauds have been outed.
XPS, XRS.
It never got public.
Yeah.
It never got public.
Okay.
So anyway, so they were more careful, right? So there were supposed to be like 100 stores in the chain. And so they drove all around China and visited 30 out of the 100, right? And then it's all looks like a Foot Locker. It's like all branded and has all the things and It looks great, right? And it looks busy. Okay. So then a couple weeks later, they're like, just to be safe, let's go check it again. And they chose like 10 out of the 30. And they went back and they all had gone back to being cell phone stores or whatever they were. So right. these people went to the limits of renting temporarily stores, completely decorating them, and that's an example of one they did catch that never made the public.
Well,
market.
Let me ask you this:
there were way too many.
I've had this argument back when I used to be invited to be on panels with investment bankers, which they refuse to do anymore. It must be something I've said, but I would ask them when they say like, oh yeah, we walk away from deals all the time when we suspect or we know there's fraud. And my question to them is, okay, and then who did you tell? Like nobody. You didn't tell any.
It's a private company. Who are they going to tell?
I don't know. The SEC.
Are you talking about a follow-on, or you're talking about if it's like some private company in China? First of all, they're unreachable. They haven't filed anything.
Well, number
with the
one,
SEC.
they were not.
The SEC doesn't
they
give a
didn't
shit.
all stay private. Some of them did end up making it public through a different bank.
Right? So if you're talking about a follow-on, and then I don't know the legal obligations that you're under. I know as an IR
I don't care
firm,
what the obligation is. I think there's a moral obligation.
No, can I answer?
Sure.
As an IR firm, our contract binds us to confidentiality in perpetuity. We cannot. The only one who can make a noisy withdrawal is an auditor. So if an auditor finds something that rises to the level where they believe that the financial statements are unreliable and that there may be fraud, they can make this filing with the SEC and do what's called a noisy withdrawal. It almost never happens, but when it does happen, the stock goes to zero.
I'm not talking about IR firms, Crocker, that are basically, they're working for a fee, and due diligence wasn't really part of your job until you made it part of your job in the end. But an investment bank that is supposed to be also looking out for the clients of the bank. Yeah. Like you brought up Breen Murray and they walked away. And I say to these bankers, who did you tell? I mean, right. Did you let any of them know? I don't really have an expectation that IR is going to make a habit out of breaching confidentiality or whatever and doing this kind of thing. But I think an investment bank has a higher obligation.
Well, I'll give you one of my better stories of where we did tell somebody and where that went.
Yeah.
So we had a client called China Yingxia up in Harbin. There's a lot, like Harbin was like a nest of frauds. Okay.
Yeah. Harbin Electric.
Yeah, Harbin Electric. And there was this woman who was the CEO, and I got to look up her name because I forget what her name was. It was Miss Zhao. Okay. So Miss Zhao has built this business, which kind of looks like an Amway. So it's kind of looks like a multi-level marketing, which is illegal in China. But we had an opinion from Chinese counsel that it didn't fit the requirements of being banned in China. So I had this really smart girl who worked for me, she'd grown up part of the time in China, part of the time in South America, but gone to college, a good college, I can't remember, good college in the States. So I said, hey, they were having their annual meeting of all their sales reps. And I said, why don't you go up there and, check it out and just try and talk to as many of these. And they were basically these old ladies whose husband had been like coal miners or steel factory. And, Harbin's in the Rust Belt, so they got laid off. So it's the old ladies who now need to like cover the basic burning expenses. So we go up there and she's listening to this speech by the CEO and the chair. And the chairwoman keeps referring to all these salespeople as shareholders over and over again, shareholders. And so this girl who worked for me, Jenny, she turns, who by the way, I think works for Microsoft today, turns to the corporate secretary and says, why does she keep saying shareholders? All the shareholders in the US, theyese guys are just, and they're like, oh, you live in South America. You don't understand Chinese well enough. So it turned out, but she came to me and she said, I'm like 100% sure that she's sold stock to these people
on the gray market. Yeah.
On the gray market,
yeah.
Which was very common at that time in northern China.
Yeah.
And so it turned out that was true. We reported it to the CFO, who was a guy based in New York, I can't remember his name, and to the little broker dealer that had taken them public. They both told us like, oh, you guys don't know what you're talking about. Then we resigned. So, after we said, give 3 weeks for you to investigate it and tell us what you did. 3 weeks went by. They said, oh, you don't understand. So we said, okay, we're out. Fast forward, like a month later, the company puts out a press release saying that, the chairman is in negotiations over their capital structure and involving the government, local government Harbin. Fast forward another month, and she was put into she was a party member, a party black cell, and then lined up against a wall and shot.
Yeah,
so when you steal from Chinese people, they take it very serious, depending, if it's in Heilongjiang, they shoot you. I don't know what they do in Shanghai, probably, do something else. But, it's very, very serious. But when you steal from US people, it's like,
whatever.
Yeah, I do remember that story now. And they because she sold shares on the gray market to a worthless company to Chinese investors. Yeah, they killed her. I mean,
and little old ladies who couldn't afford the loss. It wasn't like selling private placement to high net worth, people. It was like little old ladies who could not afford. This was their savings now wrapped up in this company.
Well, and look, I mean, I feel bad for the little old ladies, but listeners have to understand too, like when Crocker's saying she was lined up and shot, I mean, she probably had a 2-hour trial, no appeals.
And it's not a trial, it's a party disciplinary hearing.
Yeah. Well,
it's not, you're not even in their version of the judicial system. You're in the party discipline system.
And it's very disciplinary because they kill you.
Final verdict.
It's a sad story on both counts, right? This person lost their life, and then these people lost money they couldn't afford to lose.
Yeah, and then I also want to correct the record. You said like we only started doing diligence like after the problems emerged, and that's not true. Like back in 2005 when I got into this, like we knew there were bad actors. So we knew if it was like, I can't remember all their names right now, but if it was like a Dr. Kit deal or anyway, there were like 4 or 5 guys where we knew if it was them, it was definitely a fraud. And so we would steer away from any of their product. But then we thought that we had a line in on these legit deals.
Right.
And then we were working with these, like what we thought were very smart hedge fund managers, all of whom had Chinese people over in China, crawling all over these companies. And we thought we were protected by the fact that, because these were like the era of the shake and bake. So you find a U.S. shell, and then you do like between a $30 to $50, $60 million pipe into the U.S. shell.
Mm-hmm.
And, presto, you got a, public company, you upgraded to NASDAQ. The hedge funds would get, they get common plus warrants. We would usually get some warrants in the deal as well. So like we were incentivized. Everyone was lined up to make it work. And we thought we were like on the right side. If you're going to China during those times, and I'm sure if you talked to John Carnes, he was much more interested than I was, you would go to these cities and you'd go to the city and you'd go like 1 year and it'd be like kind of a dump. And you'd go back a year later and they'd have this like beautiful downtown with all these office buildings. And so you could see the wealth, the physical capital being created in front of your eyes.
Right. From the money they were stealing
and
from
so
us.
you're like so intoxicated. You're like, this is real. I want to in on this. But then you didn't understand, yeah, it is real if you're aligned correctly, with the government and your position correctly. It's just not real necessarily if you're an outsider trying to participate in the value creation.
Okay. Well, look, I mean, I get that I'm a tougher sell on what due diligence was and is. And like, I think you touched on it before, like, with the background that I had going into 2009 and 10 with doing due diligence in China. And we're just out there finding, our story, right?
Right.
I wanted to prove Carson Block wrong because I came from a publicly listed company here in the United States that would never do something like that. They was all very honorable people. And I'm like, this guy's just, completely full of shit. So we hired an investigator to go look at 30 companies over a month and a half. And, he comes back and says, yeah, the short sellers are wrong. They're understating the problem. All 30 of these companies are a fraud. And then starts the battle with everybody. Like the investment banks, I went to them the same way you did on that one deal. And they're just like, well, you know what you're talking about. Go back to where you're from or we're going to sue you, blah, blah, blah. We'd fight with IR firms, not necessarily you. I mean, my experience there, like meeting all you guys, like one of them I remember, I still remember the first time I saw you, Crocker. It was at the Fountain Blue at a Roth conference. And I walk in and there's this guy wearing like plaid pants and a bright green shirt. And I'm like, who is this guy? And like a Princeton haircut, whatever, just like his leg crossed over and he's just fine. And, holding court with people coming over to him. I'm like, that's a bold move with the play. Do you still have those plaid pants? Or the green ones?
I do have, I don't know if you're talking about Madras shorts. I'm like about a week away from breaking out the Madras shorts. And those become my
I wouldn't
outfit.
have a label for them. I wouldn't know Madras shorts from like Ocean Pacific.
Okay.
I mean, come on, give me a break.
Anyway,
you're making this worse for yourself.
I'm digging my own grave.
Yeah, but like when Maj would meet with you and your clients, I mean, you were very short. You're very to the point. We've got this much time. We've got to meet with another one, and there was that kind of, I'll say professionalism. And then you go to like, Red Chip or Dave Gentry, which I affectionately call Bozo the IR clown, complete with a big red nose and these really loud suits with vest lapels. And it just totally looks like that guy. And that would have his own television station called Red Chip TV.
Right.
And then Hayden, which was, I felt was kind of a really slick turn him and burn him.
He's a smart guy, and he sold at the right time. So I turned down the offer that he took, and that was the dumbest thing I ever did.
Yeah,
I should have sold to MZ, and I turned him down, and then they went to Hayden. He sold.
Yeah, he got out clean. He got out clean, and I think he had a good guy working for him in John Matteo. But that Haberfield, Ted Haberfield. I hope you listen to the show. You're just a jerk off. But we would fight.
Don't pull your punches there. Yeah.
No. Oh, I didn't even want to talk to him because like one of the first shorts we ever did was China Redstone. Remember the cemetery company, China Redstone?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Okay. So they represented them. And, Maj and I decided we didn't want to be short sellers, but we found this information and we want the public to know.
Right.
So we'll put out the information on Lotus Pharmaceuticals and China
Right.
Redstone, and we'll do it for free. We won't charge
Right.
anybody anything, and people will love us. And when we did, of course, they said we're short sellers anyway, and they weren't going to pay anything
Right.
for research, and
Yeah,
we wasted
right.
$50,000. But we get on this call with Hayden
Yeah.
and Haberfield, and we're like, look, we bought cemetery plots. They don't, and the receipts we have here, they don't own the cemetery. And I remember at one point, Haberfield saying to me, wait a minute. You guys don't know what you're talking about. I've been there. Have you been there? I was like, no, our people have been there, and they've got a ministry of cemeteries like in China that we called and said they don't own it. And he kept on saying, I've been there. I was like, okay, let's just suss this point out. Somebody took you to a cemetery, pointed at it, and said, I own it. And that's what
your due diligence.
Yeah. And it really devolved from there. Like Hayden,
Yeah.
was
Right.
just like, you guys are going to kill each other, end the call.
Just lost the shit. Yeah.
And
Okay.
it turned out that was our moment where, like, okay, we're now going to short stocks.
Put money to work.
And
Yeah.
that first big one for us was Puda Coal.
I think that's where you and I had our kind of like perverse bonding moment. Even though that led up to a like 2 years of misery for me.
Yeah.
So, we were in fairly close communications at that time. And you were like, Crocker, I have something. I just can't tell you what it is, but just be ready. And it's coming in like, 2 days, something like that. And I was like, oh shit.
Well, we had put out note. We had put out a note saying something was coming, and you called me.
Oh, okay. All right. You have a better memory.
You were like, what, is this really bad? And I was like, yeah, it's really bad. And you were like, can you tell me what it is? And I was like, I absolutely cannot. And you're like, okay.
Yeah. And you weren't you racing against someone else to get it out too? Or did you have that you had that to yourself? I can't remember. There's so many of them.
We did have it to ourselves, but we were so we lacked confidence to a degree that we actually called in Alfred Little, John Carnes. It turns out to be at the time.
I'm going to tell you about John Carnes. Like the full story of John Carnes is not out there. So if you're listening,
yeah, it is. Did you listen to his podcast?
Did he talk about his life before he became a short seller?
Yes,
and his
he did.
Collaboration with Andrew Warden? Okay.
Yeah, he did.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
he did. And then he was long some frauds and
It was not long. Like
well,
put them together.
pipe deals and yeah. And Andrew Warden just made a mint of money.
Yeah.
Like a palace on Central Park, which I'm not happy. And look, go listen to that. And I told John I wasn't happy about it. So nor was I happy about his buying a pill farm in New Orleans that was just like selling Percocet to everybody. I'm like, is there a moral problem with that at all?
He's like, I'm in Dubai. Don't bother me. Okay. All right. Okay. Props on that. Anyway, he's like crazy smart, but he's the only guy I know who truly played both sides of this from the inside. I played it, from the outside, but he played it like from the inside. So anyway, what were we talking about? Oh, Puda Coal. So I'm sitting there in my office, which at that point was like this beautiful office that we were, because we had all these clients in China and some in South America and Israel. And
how many offices did you have? You had like New York, Israel,
At
China?
one point, we had Beijing, Shanghai, Hong Kong, LA, New York. Those were owned offices. Then we had our affiliate in Tel Aviv. And then for a year, we were tied into MZ down in Brazil. So, that was like a total of 7 offices, so we were on this like crazy growth curve in 2009, which, as you just mentioned, that was like, while the rest of the world was still like licking its wounds and suffering,
right.
China was just like went through the roof.
They did.
And that was the year we like harvested, the most of our warrants we ever did ever. And it was like the best year we ever had. Well, while the US was still in the tank, we did great because all these China stocks ripped. But anyway, so Puda Coal, I'm sitting there in the office and, this thing comes out and I'm reading it. And then I'm like looking at the thing where he transfers the title to the coal mines, and it's in Chinese. So I hand it to one of my.
He pledged U.S. shareholders' interest, half the company to Citic Bank for.
No, that's the second step. First, he transferred ownership in the mines away from the public company,
which we saw in the SAIC files. Yeah.
Right. And then on that thing was a picture of his driver's license.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So I gave it to, it's in Chinese. So I gave it to one of my Chinese. And I said, read this and tell me, is this true? And they took like 3 minutes. Like, yeah, it's true. And I'm like, fuck, we're dead. So then I called the audit chair, Larry Wiesel.
Mm-hmm.
I said, Larry, this company is an absolute fraud. And then I called the CFO, Leiby Wu, and told her, Leiby, you've been working for a fraud for all these years. And from that point on, the U.S.
Crocker, hold on a second. What did she say? What did the CFO say when you said you're working for a fraud?
She said she had absolutely no idea. She was based in Beijing. They were out in what was that coal country where they were? Taiwan. What's the city out there? It's like the West Virginia of China.
Yeah, it'll come to me. Go ahead.
Anyway, so the city that they're based in is like literally like the West Virginia of China. You get off the airplane within 3 minutes, you have like black dust on all your clothes. But the thing that broke my heart about that was I was convinced that this guy, the CEO, was like the most like legit of all our CEOs.
Ming Zhao.
Yeah, and I'll tell you why. Because when he wanted to buy those mines and the U.S. capital markets fell apart to the financial crisis, he put up his own money to buy them and then put them supposedly into the public company. He did for a while, put them in the public company. And I was like, what a stand-up guy. Like what American CEO would take like $8 million of their own money and buy these mines and put it in? Like no one would do that. So I was like, and I have a great story also on him. So the last roadshow we did with him, he flew to New York because they were doing a secondary or something like that with Macquarie, and he was in the. So first of all, we would help with like ancillary services like booking tickets and stuff, and we were like, you only have a one-way ticket. Do you want help, booking return? And he's like, oh no, I don't need return. And I was like, well, why? He's like, oh, I bought private plane. I fly back on private plane. and then we're in the lobby, having coffee. And then suddenly, like, he starts to sweat. And I'm like, what's the matter? He's like, my briefcase. And I'm like, this is translated, but like my briefcase, I don't know where my briefcase. So his briefcase like temporarily disappeared for 10 minutes. And he was like literally running with sweat. And I was like, well, who cares? You can buy another briefcase. We're right here on Fifth Avenue. And it turned out he had like $5 million in cash in that briefcase.
Oh,
no, that was his walking around money.
That's
for a trip to New York. So like that just gives you a sense of how this guy was like living large, not so much like partying like that guy from Malaysia, but just like living large.
Well, look, man. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I don't know that you know everything, related to the guy, because you don't just travel around with $5 million in a briefcase for no reason.
Well, I'm sure he had friends.
I'm sure he did, but like it turns out, like he was, a total criminal, and he was involved in Longway Petroleum as well behind that guy.
Really?
Yeah. We ended up having a fight with him when we thought we were fighting with Longway Petroleum, and it was the same kind of scam. But yeah. So the
fact that Citic did that. Macquarie
doesn't give a shit.
It's unbelievable that Macquarie missed that. That you find it and they miss it.
It turns out they didn't miss it. They just ignored it. No, that was in there. They paid $17 million, which is a speeding ticket, but they had pulled the same files that we did 2 months earlier and a month before they raised $97 million.
And they chose to ignore that the assets on which the capital raise were based were no longer in the company.
I guess the story is that the underling who pulled the file chose not to tell anybody in charge or share. I mean, what are you going to say when you're caught? And discovery shows that you had this file, right?
Right.
So they pay $17 million or something to the SEC, which I got none of because it wasn't Puda-Cole, it was Macquarie paying. And Puda-Cole, as a whistleblower award, wasn't going to pay any of the $250 million default judgment.
And Larry Wiesel spent the next 4 years of his life trying to unravel that thing to no effect.
Right.
And then he about a year ago died of cancer. So,
Yeah.
and he was a good guy. He had no idea. He was like a lifer at Deloitte. He had no idea that was going on.
No, he reached out to me.
Oh, okay.
Like one of the very few board of directors or anybody with any kind of fiduciary responsibility involved in any of these companies. Early on, people were so shocked, I guess I would say, that you would get a call from a director and say, okay, take me through it. I'm skeptical, but take me through it. Now it's just like, I don't want to know. The plausible deniability thing for any so-called independent board of director is complete here for U.S. listed companies too. So did you ever talk to Ming Zhao subsequent to our report going out? Did you ever have a conversation with him again?
We had a translated thing, and he said he was going to make it good to the shareholders somehow. And he kind of made these promises, but they were kind of vague. Mm-hmm. And then as time went by, it was always through translation, because I never learned Mandarin. So I always had, but I had a big team at that time in China. Mm-hmm. So, and everybody there would always be like a China account manager on every account. I can't ever remember actually. The other irony is we had just done a non-deal roadshow to visit those mines like 6 weeks before you published a report. So we brought 25 investors out to visit those mines, which they didn't even fucking own.
Yeah, well, by appointment when they're ready for you to show up, which is never the way to do it in China, as we've since learned.
But I'm sure they were running. It's just like they weren't an asset of the public company anymore.
Yeah. So then I want to address like past all of this, because we could tell a story about five other companies, but you had this crisis of conscience that other IR firms didn't have. That people just doesn't make it out into my community that you did this, and you chose to say to your clients that all of you are going to go through an extra layer of due diligence from my company from now on if I'm going to represent you. And what ended up happening to your business because you did that?
I can't say it all happened because of that due diligence. I think it was a combination of the market was just melting. We'd gotten way too overexposed to that piece of the market. So like it wasn't like in the beginning it was like 50-50 US China. And then because China like grew so fast, we ended up where it was like 75 or 80% of our revenues were coming from China. So as you guys and Carson and Alfred Little, started to rip into these companies, then what do? They either go private, they just stop filing, they go dark. I mean, they just, if they have some have like a maybe a fighting chance and they fight it out, but majority they're on a path to disappearing. So like all this market cap that had been created from 2005 to 2010, just like, it's like an ice cube, in a sauna, right? So that business is melting. At the same time, we're saying, okay, we need to give you extra layer of scrutiny. And we were trying to do in a half-assed way what you guys were doing. So we'd have our employees go like park their car outside the factory gates and try and see how many trucks were really coming through and do stuff like that. But we didn't like think of like setting up time-lapse video or.
Yeah, but nobody else in IR was even doing that.
No, nobody cared. I do maintain that there were one or two investment banks that were making an effort. They weren't necessarily very successful. There were also investment banks.
And who were those?
I know that once all this stuff came out, I know that Roth did put an extra layer of scrutiny.
Oh, give me a fucking break.
No, I do. Because we went on trips with them. Now, were they effective? No, because they didn't like do what you did, which is like go talk to the T person or come with totally unannounced and be they have to.
We gave them all a roadmap in each report. Like I remember with Sino Clean Energy that everybody.
Who was the bank on that?
Well, it was one of the two.
I can't really remember.
It was one of the two. It was either Roth or Rodman. They were the kind of big.
I mean, Rodman had a kind of an explicit no diligence, no questions asked policy.
Yeah.
Like if they could get the follow-on done, if they could do the shelf offering of the pipe, they would just do it. Like it didn't matter. And that was a very kind of explicit brand position for them. And I think that's why they got tagged heavier. It became a PR nightmare for Byron, but I think he didn't get the same level of discipline.
He certainly made a lot of money.
For a while, yeah. But, he also has made a lot of money in a lot of other ways, too. So.
Yeah, well, good for him. So that brings us to the China Hustle, because in two different ways, because Byron actually sent a cease and desist letter for that movie to me.
To you? You didn't produce it, did you?
No, but I had it made into toilet paper. Did I give you one of those? I think I gave one to Drew. If you'd like one, I'll mail it to you. But it's a cease and desist letter with me and Mark Cuban and everybody who produced this movie in Hollywood. I'm like, this, right. Yeah, whatever. And the one thing I want to bring up about this movie, and there are several things that I don't like about it, mostly myself, but in it,
you're the hero. How can you not like yourself?
No.
I mean, you could have maybe hit the gym a little bit more, but in terms of your moral portrayal, that was a total win for you.
Well, listen, maybe if I lose some weight, you'll loan me your green pants. Good for you. I'll pass. But in the movie, you say at one point, hey, we did this. Who could know? And then it just cuts to me saying a gate guard knew, which is in the movie. And I just want to set the record straight. That's completely out of context. I was speaking in relation to General Clark and what the due diligence that Rodman did, and not you.
Which I already explained what that was.
Right. And it kind of made you look bad there. Did you ever get any blowback about that?
I got something on my DMs on Twitter last week. Last week that said, from some rando, said, I just watched China Hustle. Fuck you, traitor.
Wow.
But that's such an upgrade from Puda Cole, because Puda Cole for 6 months I was getting, I know who you are, I know where you live, I'm gonna kill you, and I'm gonna kill your children and your wife.
Love mom.
Yeah. Love mom. Yeah. I got from this. These are from people, I guess, they claimed had put their life savings into a single microcap stock in China, which is great portfolio diversification. Got wiped out on it, and they literally were issuing death threats to me in voicemails.
Yeah, that same person sent an email to me saying the exact same thing. They're just lashing out at the world, and I really feel for them. But and I'm sorry that the way that turned out, because you're brave enough to sit down and talk to them.
Yeah, most people pussied out of it.
Yeah,
or walked out in the middle.
Gentry was going to do it, and then he didn't, smartly on his part. Right. But you did, and there you go.
At that time, just 1 second. At that time, I was kind of out of the IR game, so I didn't really care, and also I just felt like there was sort of a moral responsibility to talk about what really happened.
Yeah.
And I took the guy, we talked in advance. I took him at his word that he was seeking the truth. It was more, I think people got a lot out of the movie, but it was more sensationalist than I would have liked, and whatever. But it was like a, I don't know. It was like maybe a B+ or B effort.
Yeah, whatever. I mean, my issues were more like I thought there were more interesting people that they could have spent time on, and really, I will say this for Byron Roth, even though I think you're a douche. There were more egregious investment banks involved in this, and you happened to throw a great party. So, and Matt Weichert was in the movie, right? So
yeah,
so there you go.
Well, and Snoop Dogg.
Right.
Come on.
I mean, that was a bad draw for him in relation to the fact that there were a great many that could have replaced Roth. But it's still well earned. I don't care how he feels.
Yeah.
All right. So
I'll tell him on your behalf that
he knows
you're insensitive to his feelings.
He's well aware.
He's such a sensitive guy.
Really is. He really. From what I hear, I've actually never met him. I actually have never met
You've
him.
never met him? Really?
No.
Okay.
No, I mean, I went to, like I said, I went to the Fontainebleau, and
Yeah.
I saw you in your designer getup.
Yeah. Oh,
and
I got to
it was-
tell you, with the first China conference that we did with Roth was in China. And this
Yeah.
was probably like 2005.
Yeah.
And at that stage, these Chinese companies, these shake and bakes, they didn't have anybody on the staff who could speak understandable English. So
Huh.
they'd have like a CFO who could kind of write English but couldn't speak English. So literally, we did this like roadshow going from like 4 cities in China, and I would be standing up there doing 6 presentations in a row on behalf of the companies. It was the most ludicrous thing you've ever seen. And we would, this is what I liked about it. We would come up with the names of these companies. We would build their websites. So, I love building things. And I thought at the time I was building things that were real. So that was what was so fun about it, was to be like building these stories and these, what we thought were viable businesses from scratch.
Yeah. Until it wasn't.
Yeah. Then it wasn't fun.
So what are you doing now? What's going on with you now? I know that like you've had your ups and downs and you're looking to be up again. And I mean, somebody's going to inevitably tweet at me, hey, I Googled Crocker Coulson and he was in the New York Post or whatever. Anything to say about that at all? I don't really care one way or another, but just give you an opportunity.
Yeah. So I've finally just this week reached a final settlement on the ancillary issues related to my divorce. So next week we will have a judgment of divorce, and then it takes probably 2 months for the court to stamp it. So I may actually be divorced this year after 6 3/4 years of being in the court system.
Wow.
We hold the record
Wow.
for the most expensive divorce in the history of Kings County.
Wow.
So we incinerated $7 million in legal fees.
Holy shit.
And I lost my entire net worth. I lost all my savings, my IRA, and I also lost all ownership in our townhouse, which, was the most important asset that I held. But I got custody of the kids. So that was a good part.
See, listeners, I told you this was a feel-good story.
Yeah. So, and now, now I'm involved with a new woman who's a Princeton professor of comparative literature. So, we sit around and talk about trash TV, obviously, all day.
Yeah, you guys watch Real Housewives of Orange County.
Yeah, exactly. That's what we do. Princeton professors and like weirdo, avant-garde art fans. That's what we do together.
So you're personally happy in a relationship?
And we have, and so I have 2 amazing children from the first marriage who are now 12. And I have now a 4-year-old and, believe it or not, a 1-year-old from the second relationship.
Wow, fertile, aren't you?
So I have 4 kids now. And, and so because of the divorce, I kind of kept a low profile for about 6 years. And I didn't do any IR. I just did corporate communications.
Mm-hmm.
So I do like writing CEO speeches and websites and marketing and white papers and like all that stuff. And my biggest client is like a $6 billion government services company. Mm-hmm. And I do all their marketing in the US and all their like, corporate communication stuff, high level employee communications. So they've been great. That's taken about 60% of my time. But also during this time, I kind of explored the other side, which is I joined the board and then became chairman of the Brooklyn Music School, which is this amazing 115-year-old community music school here in Brooklyn that serves underprivileged kids and gives them access to music, dance, and performing arts. Then out of that, I founded an independent school called MUSE Academy, which is now in its 3rd year. It's been growing like a weed. It has an incredibly diverse, the kids are evenly split between, I'm going to show that I'm hip now, between white and BIPOC. And we have a very inclusive.
What the fuck is BIPOC?
Let me see if I can get it right. It's Black, Indigenous, People of Color. So it kind of incorporates everything.
Huh. You can't just say white and minority community anymore?
No, apparently that's not the way to do it.
You people are killing me with these names. Yeah, right.
Welcome to Brooklyn, dude. Welcome to Brooklyn.
Okay.
So anyway, so it's an amazing school, and we're doubling our enrollment next year. We were one of the only schools in New York that was 5 days a week in person. since September, we had 0 cases of on-site transmission of COVID. So it's like a huge success story.
Good.
Our kids had no learning slide whatsoever. They did have to wear masks, but whatever. So that's been very personally fulfilling. And now, like starting the beginning of this year, I'm kind of reemerging. So I started a new entity called AUM Media, and I will do investor relations, but I also do digital marketing, do media relations, do the kind of like thought leadership stuff, and I'll do like on the front end kind of capital markets advisory. So it's working with companies that are either like 6 months to a year out from doing an IPO, or working with SPAC sponsors, and then hopefully with the targets. But not so much
Call Chamath.
I don't want to do the not Chamath. No, but I think it's a legitimate structure. I do think that there'll be certain companies that give out totally inflated BS forecasts and
what will you do when they do that?
Oh, I don't think they'll fit, because I'll tell them my counsel on guidance, and they'll say, go take a hike.
Yeah, there you go. Good.
It's just like, if you're a stock promoter, I can smell you, you can smell me, and we probably have, one cordial meeting, and that's the last we ever see each other. If you're like trying to, if you think you have, and there's no guarantees in new businesses, right?
Yeah,
or
that's
growing
true.
businesses.
Sure.
They don't all work out.
Right.
But if you are in good faith, trying to build a category killer in whatever, and you have a reasonable plan, and you can explain your business metrics and how that translates into your forecast and support all your
not
forecasts.
An onerous warrant structure.
Well, so that's in the eye of the beholder. So the question is, first of all, everything is negotiable in a SPAC. So the promote is 20%, but maybe it's 5%. And especially when they get down to like month 18, month 19, at that point, they're fucking desperate to do anything. So if it's a good company, they're gonna negotiate away a good chunk of that promote. And the warrant, the thing that stopped the market is the warrant valuation, but that's a complete nonsense. That's like a non-cash charge. The SEC accountant has never applied this new valuation theory to any other very comparable transactions that have been done for decades. So what it really was is, the inside story is, the SEC is used to doing like 80 IPOs a quarter. Suddenly they're doing 400. And these guys are like civil servants. They like to go home at 5 and they're working until 2, 3 in the morning, like all the investment bankers. They're like, get me out of this. This sucks. And then the guys at the top are like, wow, they're raising so much money. This sounds really dangerous. And then there's some really high profile frauds that have been exposed by Hindenburg and Carson and a couple other guys. And so they're like, okay, so there are definitely some big, juicy, rotten apples in this barrel. So we got to, stop it. And the only way they could think to stop it was to just throw the sand in the gears with this warrant valuation thing. But that's like, we're at the end of the tunnel there. The SEC has now issued guidance on how to write the warrants so they treat it as equity. So then we don't have to go mark to market every quarter. So that's all going away, and it'll rev up again, depending on market appetite. Look, if all these SPACs mergers into garbage companies and they all miss their forecasts in the next 2 years, then that'll be that. But if the majority merge into like quality companies or reasonable quality companies, then this will be seen as a viable like third path. You have IPO, direct listing, which is really for specialized companies that don't need capital, and then you have SPAC. And the SPAC has the advantage: you get public in 3 months instead of 12 months. And it
definitely has an advantage to somebody. But look. At the end of the day, they're good for my business. I don't know that they've overall been good for investors as a whole. Some SPACs are. Some SPACs are.
Let me say this: owning a SPAC and then redeeming is pretty much the safest investment you can make. And that's why a lot of hedge funds have too much capital. That's why they find it so attractive. So they buy the unit, they lever it up 5, 10, whatever they can. They get the T-bill, right? And then they have the warrant, and they just play the warrant, and they cash the warrant at the right time. So as long as you redeem, you cannot lose money. Now, if you don't redeem,
I wasn't talking about the hedge funds. I was talking about the retail.
But retail could play it the same way, But if you're an idiot and the thing has run up like 150% before they even announce a target, and you're buying the common, you didn't even get the unit with the warrant, you're just a fucking idiot who doesn't understand what you're doing. And at certain points, buyer beware.
I mean, look, I don't know that people who lose a lot of money feel better about being called an idiot, even if it's true. But
there's a real investor education thing that needs to happen. And,
I agree with that.
I think NASDAQ is making an effort. I think, in a way, Carson said the solution is they need to get spanked. But I think that, people need to understand what they're buying. And if you're just buying stuff because it's a meme, you kind of get what you deserve.
Well, look, I mean, I want to live in the world you live in where, all retail investors are more educated and worldly and have a better idea about what they're buying. But the world I currently live in, that isn't the case. So I just say buyer beware. I don't think everybody getting into this market is necessarily stupid as they are, just truly ignorant in the true definition of the word. And some of that education will cost you money, unfortunately.
Yeah. Well, that's, pain is one of the fastest forms to learning in any case, whether you're trying to do a sport or anything. Pain is how humans learn.
Right. I don't know what Crocker said about warrants and this and that, but I'm all in for the Shax pack.
Crocker, this is a perfect example. The guy floats around here, Carl, all day long, right? And you think he would understand something about what does SPAC stand for, Carl?
It's Special Purpose Acquisition Company.
Oh,
very good. Passed the test.
Yeah,
He's cracked a textbook.
Yeah,
yeah.
You cheater.
But again, Shax back all the way.
Whatever.
Well, just wait till it runs to like 300 above trust, 300% above trust, and just buy as much as you can. And don't care that you're just getting the common, you didn't get the warrant. Just go for it. It'll work out for you.
Okay. That's gonna make a wonderful pitch. You're gonna do just fine, Crocker. Yeah. Well, look, I mean, I wish you the best out of your business. You seem to have been able to reinvent yourself a couple of times here.
Yep. So this is, round 4 or whatever. So
yeah, you got a tough road to hoe these last 5-10 years, and pain and suffering is the best learning tools. I think what you said. So you might have had some of that, and it sounds like your personal life is going great, and that's a good key base to getting out there and having a great professional life again. Is there anything you want to add that we haven't talked about? Is there anything about the space and short seller? Have you ever considered being a short seller?
I talked to my brother 2 weeks ago, and he was like,
your brother by the name is Cromwell.
Yeah, another like really common name.
Yeah.
And also was known as being a ruthless killer of people who disagree with him. But and he was like, yeah, why don't you go into short selling and go work for one of these guys? And I was like, well, you know what? There's a lot of people who on the analytical side are stronger than me. And, they already did their CFA and their MBA. Yeah. And there's just not a lot. And also the other thing is, I know you get a lot of like moral charge out of exposing people and ripping them down. I kind of like am energized by building things up. So even if it doesn't work out, like my big thing is like, find a company that has potential where I can trust the people and they have a legitimate shot, and help them build in a business that can hire a bunch of people, scale into a category leader. Like that's like my dream thing. Just like with a school, taking it from like literally a spreadsheet and a PowerPoint to now next year, a school that has like 80 kids going to it and is the best, like, music and performing arts grade school in Brooklyn. Like, that's really cool. I built something in 4 years, so if I can do that, I don't have to work with 100 companies anymore because I'm not going to have those leases, and I'm not going to have the payroll. I can be more selective and life will be good. That's my hope.
Well, look, you pointed your ship in a direction, so sail that way, right?
Will do.
I think Cromwell was right, though. If you wanted, like in a short selling environment like here at Wolfpack or Muddy Waters or wherever else, very rarely is one person everything. right? Like, the
Right.
writer, the forensic accountant, the sound engineer. So, like, yeah, I mean, you bring something to that, and I think Cromwell maybe saw that, but it sounds like you're choosing to do things that you think are going to make you happy in life at this point.
Yeah. And I always have, and that's why I'm not rich. So, but I'm rich in number of children.
I kind of figured you weren't rich because you spent $7 million on a divorce.
Holy cow, man.
Yeah, that zeroed me out again. But the independent filmmaking thing didn't help. The trying to be the Godard of Los Angeles. That was like not really a strategy.
Trying to
for
be
success.
the what?
The Jean-Luc Godard of Los Angeles. That was like not a strategy for success.
Oh yeah, Jean-Luc Godard.
Oh, I love his stuff.
Yeah. So
well, look, you
so
know
whatever.
What? You be you.
Yeah, I'll be me. And I listened to your interview, Roddy Boyd, and I feel like, well, at least I've got a more viable business model than he does. But I'm actually talking to him this weekend because I have some ideas how he can monetize what he's doing. So we'll see how that works out.
Yes, please help.
That is one of the best lines I've heard in so many podcasts. Like, my life sucks, my career sucks, but it's not Roddy Boyd suck. I mean, like, and Roddy would just laugh his ass off at that too, and he knows he bangs his head against the wall to try and do things on a dime and for all the right reasons and not trade, but like. You're so right. I mean, there's just no money in what he does, but he does it anyway.
It never will be. Okay.
No.
All right.
Love what you do.
Thanks.
Talk to you later.
Leave
my people alone.
And to our listeners, thanks for listening. If you like what you heard, leave us a comment, give us a retweet, follow us on Twitter. Thanks for joining us.